Hi, Josh.
Hi,
I
Kathy.
just I just realized it's actually Friday, Friday before a long weekend. Apparently, we have nothing else to do, which is probably a good sign. So yeah, it's actually really nice that we have finally have found the time to sit down and chat about this. We chatted a lot at Quirks and after Quirks. At that time, I remember we said that this is actually really interesting conversations. We should probably share the conversations with a broader audience. So yeah, where do you think we should start?
Well, especially at Quirks, but also elsewhere. I think everyone's talking about ChatGPT still, so maybe let's start there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, ChatGPT. Yeah, a lot of talks, a lot of discussions, presentations still about ChatGPT. So, what's your take on that?
Well, I think, people are talking about ChatGPT for a reason, and it's because it's sort of the most visible aspect of the family of models that are using GPT technology. It was designed by OpenAI for a reason to be very accessible and intuitive for people to use. But it also kind of obfuscates all that is capable, all that's possible using GPT technology and all the other tools that are being built with the same technology.
So since this is a market research talk, maybe let me ask the question this way. What if you wake up tomorrow morning and you heard in the news that ChatGPT disappeared, no longer available? How would you feel?
I'd be totally fine with that because, well, we use some of OpenAI's other offerings, which aren't the ChatGPT product specifically. So it'd be a little bit different if OpenAI disappeared, though.
Maybe can you explain that to me? Like, what's the relation? There are a lot of things people are talking about: ChatGPT, OpenAI, GPT technology, large language models. Maybe, yeah, can you?
Sure, and I'll keep it as quick as and simple as possible. So first of all, GPT, it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's a type of architecture that these various models are built on top of, and it also kind of explains the training regime, basically how these models are built, how they work. So GPT was not invented by OpenAI, but what OpenAI did is they built really, really large languages using that technology or using that approach. So ChatGPT is a specific product with a user interface and all sorts of features that they've built in. And that's really designed for kind of end users, people that aren't necessarily building things on top of GPT, but someone that just wants to use it sort of as an assistant. So at the same time, OpenAI has also released a number of APIs where people or companies that are building things using large language models, of which GPT is the underlying technology, it makes it really easy for those people to use those capabilities within their own application. Does that make sense?
I think so. So what I'm hearing is because I heard people talking about ChatGPT, it seems like the only thing that is super powerful. There's almost like fear. If everything is built on ChatGPT, what if are we stuck? So there's almost like this kind of sentiment. So I suppose what you have just said means no, that it's not. That's definitely not the case.
Yeah, and a lot of it, first of all, is kind of confusion just with the naming. So most products that are built using OpenAI's models, they're not built on top of the ChatGPT product. They're built on top of OpenAI's API offerings, which are maybe confusingly also called GPT. For example, GPT-3, GPT-4, GPT 3.5. So ChatGPT itself is kind of separate. They're kind of sharing the same capabilities, but ChatGPT is kind of a user-facing product from OpenAI. So maybe another question would be, if OpenAI totally disappeared, then what? And the answer is that might not be such a big deal either. So there's tons of companies, not just companies, but also a ton happening in the open source community, where people are building their own large language models. And so again, these large language models, they're all based on GPT technology. But what that means is that there's things like Claude or Llama 2, you might have heard of these. These are all other models aside from OpenAI, nothing to do with OpenAI, that have a lot of the same capabilities as OpenAI's models.
Is that the same as small large language models, or these are just different large language models?
So small large language models is something that I maybe throw around internally. It's not really a proper term. For me, it more kind of encapsulates the idea that there are a lot of optimizations and new discoveries related to how really effective language models can be trained. So what that means is like GPT-4, for example, was trained on a huge amount of data and a huge amount of computational resources in order to train it. But really smart researchers are finding a lot more efficient ways to train things with the same capabilities, but without requiring the same amount of computation. And I'll also just mention one of the really important things about some of these models is that they're foundation models. So what that means is that you only need to train it once, and then you have those capabilities, and they can be very expensive to run, but we're getting better at minimizing that. But what that means is that, for example, if there's an open source foundation model, such as Llama 2, then people can fine tune that or train that for their own purposes without needing to train it from scratch. So that's why it's a foundation model. You can take that as the foundation or the base and then do whatever you want with that. So that's why it's really important to consider that with these available as open source, you don't need a huge amount of resources in order to make it do what you want it to do.
That's actually really important. What that means is, do you think we should expect more and more custom-built, purpose-built tools using those open source models so that to train very quickly and easily, and the results would be very effective?
Absolutely. And like another big kind of consideration is that you can also, you don't necessarily need to depend on a third-party company. So that can be a really big consideration, especially for things like privacy, which maybe we'll get to. But that means that you can build, you can take an open source model, train it in-house, fine-tune it, and then you can also serve and deploy it within your company. So you don't necessarily need to be relying on other companies in order to use large language models.
Actually, you just mentioned privacy. That reminds me, maybe let me dwell on the GPT versus ChatGPT a little bit more. A lot of concerns. So at the conference or elsewhere, it is very encouraged that people should use ChatGPT. It's good to try it, to experience it. At the same time, there's a lot of warning. Please don't upload your own data. Don't upload your client's data, because there are still privacy concerns. You have no idea what OpenAI is going to do with the data that you're going to upload. Having said that, this is ChatGPT, right? Versus other purpose-built technologies or tools, AI tools built on GPT technology. Can you maybe clarify a little bit, specifically in terms of privacy concerns? Is there any difference between ChatGPT and other technologies built on GPT?
Yeah, for sure. So, and this is something that, I mean, I would really just recommend people look at, for example, OpenAI's data regulations or other companies. So it could be, for example, Meta. So for OpenAI specifically, if you look, basically, yes, they do use data input into ChatGPT by default. They might use that for pretty much any purpose. That said, at an organizational level, organizations can opt out of data being used for model training, even within data that's entered into ChatGPT. In addition, by default, all of OpenAI's APIs, which most of the products built on top of OpenAI's technology, they're going to be using the APIs. And so by default, OpenAI does not use any of that data for training. They retain it for up to 30 days, basically for monitoring, but they're not using that to improve their own products. And then finally, there's a whole bunch of other companies doing this. So if you look at the various different data processing policies of other companies, it'll depend on the company, obviously, but there's lots available where they're not going to use your data for their own purposes.
Okay, so that actually sounds really good. So does it mean if you were to use ChatGPT, the consumer-facing tool interface, you should be very aware of the potential of privacy concerns. But if you choose to use a commercial tool that's built on GPT technology, it's more about looking to the privacy policy of this specific tool. But most likely, it's definitely not the same as I don't know what's the right word. You wouldn't have to worry the same as.
Yeah, and I mean, like if we look at existing frameworks for privacy like GDPR, not a lot has really changed here, aside from the fact that data could be used for model training. But that's just one additional use case. But if you look at GDPR, everything there still applies. So GDPR kind of requires that for anyone that's compliant with GDPR, you need to be explicit and transparent about what your data, who or where your data subprocessors are processing the data and what that data is being used for. So, if for example, someone is using OpenAI or Meta as a data subprocessor, If they're GDPR compliant, they need to make that explicit, and they need to make it clear to the users of that product how their data is being used, how long it's being retained for, etc.
Cool. Okay, so I'm debating whether I should ask this question, but I feel like on certain days I'm very clear about the differences, but on other days I'm still very confused. Chat GPT, large language model. I know that Chat GPT and GPT, they're not the same, but GPT and large language model, are they really interchangeable? Are they exactly the same things?
So not quite, and I understand it is quite confusing. By and large, basically every large language model is using generative pre-trained transformer, that GPT architectural technology, as the way that they're built. That said, GPT is also being used for a whole bunch of other things which you wouldn't really call a large language model. So for example, you might see things where new products or technologies say transformer based, and that's referring to the fact that it's using something like the same GPT architecture. So there's things like SC or single cell GPT. So that's used within biology to understand dynamics at the single cell level. There's new things as well, like Meta has just released an open source model called AudioCraft. So this is for generating sounds from text. And I mean, yes, depending on your definition, maybe you'd call this a large language model, but I mean, you can generate things like music. So in that sense, it's not really language. It's using language as the input, but it's outputting something totally different. So all of that is transformer based, but there's tons and tons of different opportunities, and language is just one of them.
Now coming back to market research, this all sounds really, really exciting. Do you see concrete applications of these transformer technologies?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, people are already finding lots of ways in which ChatGPT, as an assistant, can help you with all sorts of things. But that's really just one product. And there's so much more that can be done if we think about the underlying capabilities of GPT. And not just GPT, actually, there's other AI models which have nothing to do with GPT. So for example, there's a lot of new advances in terms of neuroimaging. Now we're able to look at brain waves and actually be able to visualize and to recreate the type of visual stimuli that people are seeing or imagining as we're measuring their brain waves. So, that's something that could have huge implications for market research, but I don't see a lot of people talking about that. Beyond that, there are other applications beyond just looking at language. So, in the same way that GPT is being used to analyze unstructured data within, DNA or other biological factors, like I mentioned, it could also be applied for analyzing social factors or social, driving forces of macro scale social trends. So, for the most part, our kind of understanding and analysis of social trends has really just focused on like, okay, what's trending, what's not trending, but we could do a lot more. We could try to understand what's actually driving those things. What are the dynamics that are causing those things to trend in the first place?
Yeah, that really is very exciting, because for market researchers, our job really is to identify the underlying motivations, underlying drivers. A lot of times it is very difficult. So it sounds like technologies are improving, really offering new opportunities to do things that otherwise we probably wouldn't have imagined possible.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Cool.